Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff. So don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Minisode. Exiled. An FLDS murder. War Baby here with another episode of Murderous Minors. When kids go astray, it's never easy to pinpoint who should be to blame. I mean, there's always someone, right? The child themselves, their parents, the system. Plenty of people exist upon which to place the blame. This time on Murderous Minors, we explore another murder out of Utah, brought to mind when the firing squad came up in our last episode. Though Troy Kell wasn't a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or a Mormon, his second act of murder took place in Utah, making him susceptible to laws drafted in the shadow of the church. When 19-year-old Parley Jeffs Dutson killed his 15-year-old girlfriend Kara Hopkins in his apartment in West Jordan, Utah, it marked the first time I'd heard of a former FLDS youth committing murder. He'd been excommunicated, banished from the only world he'd ever known, and thrust into a lifestyle where nothing mattered anymore. And Parley wasn't the only child that this happened to. There's thousands of so-called lost boys out there, teenage sons of the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints sect, an offshoot of the original LDS Church founded in 1830 by Joseph Smith, who fancied himself a prophet of God. One of the many messages from God that Smith relayed to his followers was the commandment of plural marriage. Polygamous values became the core foundational doctrine of the new religion in 1843, and Smith married about 40 women before he fell to his death, after being arrested for treason and chased down by a mob of townfolk. Utah polygamists suffered persecution at the hands of the government for over 40 years, until the doctrine was suspended and proponents of the lifestyle fled south, unwilling to abandon this core belief. Founders of this new version of their old religion settled in Colorado City, Arizona, near the northwestern Arizona-Utah border, and it was there that one of the most infamous polygamists in U.S. history came to be known. Warren Jeffs comes from a foundational family in the FLDS sect. His father, Rulon, became the leader and prophet in 1986 and remained so until his death at 92 in 2002. At that time, he was said to have approximately 50 to 75 wives and 60 to 80 children. When Rulon gained power, he gave himself ultimate say, so when his health began to fail, it was easier for his son Warren to move in. Not only did the former school headmaster take his father's power, but he took some of his wives as well. The rules became more restrictive when it came to his followers. However, the prophet began enjoying doing whatever he liked. Amidst his all-consuming attempt to maintain control over his flock, Jeffs began exiling young men from Colorado City, about 2 years after he became the prophet. The FLDS had erected a remote outpost in Texas to which the first set of lost boys were sent. Then, not only did Warren Jeffs marry some of his stepmothers, he also began marrying underage girls from the community. And in what can only be perceived as rewarding behavior, those FLDS men who met the required threshold of success and financial tithing to the church were given more wives, sometimes by breaking up established families and excommunicating their husbands. Children were routinely separated from their fathers, forced to live under the roof of a strange man, commingling with his existing wives and children. Other times, the teenage girls of the community, who would normally be dating and marrying the very boys Warren Jeffs was now having cast out, were married off to much older men with other wives and sometimes children older than themselves. By 2005, when Parley Jeff's Dutson was severed from the community, most of the banished ended up just over the state line in St. George, or much further north in Salt Lake City suburbs like West Jordan, living amongst others like them. Many of these boys had a new, skewed view of reality. For all of their lives, they'd been taught that to separate from the church meant to be destined for hell, and since they were already expected there, they may as well partake of the other devilish temptations the secular world had to offer, while they were still on the earthly plane. In addition to the obligatory obsession with pastimes once forbidden, like clothing, colorful hair, girls, movies, and music, alcohol and drugs quickly became commonplace vices. What used to be a fun way of relieving stress became a means of self-medication and a veritable fuck you to their old way of life. A way of life to which they were no longer privy, though everyone they'd ever loved was still there. The push and pull of emotions produced a physical response in these kids, whether they wanted to remain a member when they left or not. That pain of being told you aren't welcome can, for some, become a pain so intense it can't be lessened. Some left by choice, but many were simply told to leave by their fathers at the behest of Warren Jeffs himself, a tactic seemingly designed to free up more young women for arranged marriages.
You have to be converted to think of God and your husband, that's me, in every thought, desire, work, action. And I'm here to do the will of my Father and thus Heavenly Father. And I hope all of you can see that you're drawing closer together through me, through priesthood, and the confidence is creating a heaven between us, always directable by the priesthood over you. Remember, purity is to do all that you do through the power of the Spirit of God and be directable by the priesthood over you. And in those revelations, the Lord said, be willing to do whatever He directs through your husband, and the light will grow within you. Pray me there, ladies. Get me there. The Lord will, if you'll have faith.
His word was law, and families used the blanket offense of disobedience to disown their sons. Kids caught by their parents, elders, or town police partaking in any number of typical teen behaviors found themselves susceptible to exile, be it listening to music, watching television, dancing, kissing, or partying. Parley's father was a Colorado City businessman who owned a deli and a candy store in town. A member of the town council, he exiled his 16-year-old son, who was remembered by a cousin as, quote, a really, really good boy. After leaving Colorado City, the teen initially settled in St. George, Utah, where he met 13-year-old Kara Hopkins. Her mother considered him a friend of the family, and he spent a good deal of time in their home when they lived in the same area. They loved each other, plus he loved her family and they him. After knowing each other for a while, the pair began to date and had been dating for about a year when Parley Dutson had a party. Although Kara's mother was well aware of his situation, she didn't see the lost boy side of Parley, the girl-crazy, hard-partying, gun-owning young man he had become. By April 7th, 2007, when Parley had friends over to his place at the Willow Cove Apartments in West Jordan, Utah, the 18-year-old's drinking and drug use had evidently escalated past the blackout stage. Kara, a 10th grader at Murray High School, was active in dance and enjoyed a close-knit family which embraced, trusted, and loved her boyfriend. That evening, Parley drank alcohol, smoked marijuana, and swallowed multiple hallucinogenic mushrooms before drinking shroom tea as well, putting him into what he remembers as a heavily inebriated state. He remembers some things, such as getting a text that his drug dealer was looking for him. Hearing this prompted Parley to grab his revolver, he recollected, which is why he was armed when he attacked his defenseless girlfriend. According to multiple party attendees, he'd pushed the 15-year-old up against a wall, and when Kara refused his advances, Parley became enraged. He reportedly began to chase her around the small apartment, successfully removing the belt from around her waist. Kara continued to dodge her boyfriend, who was freely brandishing the weapon and trying to undress her, until she attempted to take refuge behind another partygoer. Parley shot at her, and Kara was struck in the back of the head, as the person shielding her got out of the way just in time. Everyone there that night agreed that Parley was out of it, so much so that when apartment security guards entered, he made no moves to disguise the fact that he had partially undressed both himself and Kara, who was mortally wounded and lying on the floor. Court documents indicate that he told the security guards that he was trying to have sex with her. When police arrived, they reportedly held him at gunpoint, to which he simply pretended they weren't there, maintaining the sexually suggestive pose he was still in with Kara. Parley could be heard talking, perhaps repeating or singing what seemed to be violent song lyrics. Kara Hopkins was taken via helicopter to the hospital. However, she was soon removed from life support. All Parley could remember, he claimed, was that he was really messed up that night. He was arrested at the scene and charged with 2 felonies, first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault, each carrying potential sentences of 15 years to life. Trial began just over 1 year later in June of 2008. The defense purported that Parley was under the influence of drugs and alcohol that fateful night, and that this was a factor in his decision to kill Kara Hopkins. But the state contended that her continued refusal of his sexual advances angered him to the point of her murder. The then 19-year-old testified, reiterating how he was too high that night to now remember murdering an innocent girl. Neither expert testimony about the effects of hallucinogenic mushrooms, nor the defense's closing, where they asserted that intoxication had basically put Parley Dutson into a vegetative state, were able to sway the jury. They agreed that Kara's death was ultimately the result of Parley's decisions, and that his, quote, convenient amnesia could not excuse him. He was found guilty on July 1, 2008. Sentencing was set for August 21st, but when that hearing came around, Kara's family was dismayed to discover that Parley was being sent for a 60-day evaluation. The court found itself in need of assistance in determining the correct sentence for this highly unusual case. One of Kara's family members present at that hearing said, quote, if he's sentenced the way I want him to be sentenced, there will be justice. I want him to go away for life. I believe in an eye for an eye. Unfortunately, Kara's loved ones had to wait even longer because a grievous error was discovered after the verdict. While interviewing the jurors once the trial had ended, an investigator for the defense heard that a different juror had once been raped, a previously unknown detail which had catastrophic ramifications. She would explain that the oversight was unintentional on her part, and it stemmed from her answer to the question on the prospective juror form, asking whether they'd ever been the victim of a crime. As it turned out, the then 40-year-old woman had been sexually assaulted at the age of 15, but she didn't consider herself a rape victim or file a police report at the time the crime occurred. When the question came up, the potential juror didn't feel it pertained to her and answered no, that she'd never been the victim of a crime. It was only during deliberations that the incident came out and was later reported to the investigator by different jurors. The judge had no choice but to overturn the conviction in May 2009, clearing the way for a retrial as he felt that had the juror answered that question more accurately, she would likely not have been selected. Over the summer, a plea deal was put together in lieu of a second trial, and on September 1, 2009, Parley Dutson pled guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for the sexual assault charge being dropped. At his sentencing that December, Parley was emotional and offered apologies to Kara's mother, then told the court, quote, I'd like to give my life to bring Kara back. Warren Jeffs was added to the FBI's top 10 most wanted list and arrested for sex crimes against minors in 2006.
Exert, study, and labor in oneness. And in connection with me and each other, I want all of you to learn the heavenly gentle touch, where when you touch someone, the fire of the Spirit of God is felt by that person, by that child,